If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. Food is fundamental for life. In today's episode, Corbin and I discuss how switching the diet from the typical Western diet to an optimized diet can add years to one's life. So, Corbin, how long do you want to live?
Oh, man, that's a good question. As long as I can view all the amazing things in life.
What's that mean?
Well, I just want to experience everything. And I just feel like a lot of times life it's too short. There's not enough of it that we can fully experience all the wonders that it has for us.
Okay. Well, what if I could tell you that with some minor changes in your lifestyle, you can add years to your life?
I'm interested in what you have to say.
Okay. Well, we're going to get a little sciencey today and focus on one specific article. There was a recent article I found in PLOS Medicine, which I will include the link in the episode notes. But the title of the article is Estimating Impact of Food Choices on Life Expectancy, a Modeling Study. And it was done by Fadness and others. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the author's name correctly, but it was published early February. And it's a pretty interesting study. They were basically looking at meta-analysis of data, looking at food consumption and what that can do for life expectancy. What do you think? Should we talk about that today?
I definitely think we should. I think food is definitely one of the fundamentals for our life. Us with our background with exercise science, food obviously goes hand in glove with exercise, and it does have an impact on mental health. So yeah, I'm definitely willing to learn more about this. Let's dive in.
Okay. And I think also, we're not hearing enough discussion about healthy eating and weight management and those types of things over the last couple of years in response to, the heavy viral spread across the globe. And so I think this is useful as well. And so basically what the study does is it looks at comparing what they consider the optimized diet to the traditional Western diet or typical Western diet. And the typical Western diet, they look at foods like whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, legumes, fish, eggs, milk, dairy, refined grains, red meat, processed meat, white meat, sugar-sweetened beverages, and added plant oils. And so when they look at the diet, we look at whole grains. This is measured in fresh weight. The typical Western diet will be 50 grams. The optimized diet is 225 grams, which is roughly about 2 thin slices of bread and 1 small bowl of whole grain cereal and some whole grain rice is kind of what they consider. So for whole grains, 225 grams of fresh weight corresponds to about 75 grams of dry weight, or equivalent of 7 servings daily.
Wow.
So increasing our amount of whole grains to 7 grams daily. Vegetables. Typical Western diet is about 250 grams. The optimized diet would be about 400 grams, or about 5 servings of fruits on a day, or vegetables on a daily basis. Fruits, 200 grams versus 400 grams. That would be about 1 banana, orange, kiwi, or a handful of berries. in a serving. So nuts, typical Western diet, surprisingly, 0 nuts, 0 grams of nuts in the typical Western diet. Very few of us are, I guess, grabbing a fistful of cashews or healthy nuts on a regular basis. And so for the optimized diet, they're saying just simply 1 handful of nuts, which is 25 grams. Legumes. Do you know what a legume is?
Would it be a type of bean?
Yes, it is a type of bean.
Okay.
I thought maybe you might think of it as, well, you're probably too young for the movie
Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yeah. Creature of the Black Lagoon. A legume is a bean, and a typical Western diet, 0 grams. And so the recommendation for the optimized diet would be 200 grams. Fish, typical Western diet, is about 50 grams. The optimized diet should be about 200 grams, which is 1 big slice of herring. So obviously you can see that this was not done in the United States. I don't know the last time I went out to a restaurant and had herring for dinner. But eggs, typical Western diet's about 50 grams. Interestingly, I think they're talking more along the lines of a whole egg, not egg whites, as a leaner protein source. But the optimized diet would be to cut that intake in half to about 25 grams.
Really?
And I believe most of that is regarding the fats that are in the yolk. We could talk maybe today, if we get to it, about kind of putting this into perspective of a balanced American diet. Milk and dairy, typical Western diet, 300 grams. The optimized diet, 200 grams. So again, cutting our dairy roughly by about 1 cup of yogurt a day. And again, making better choices with that is obviously the right choice. Refined grains, what do you think? Does that go up or down?
I would assume it would go down.
Right,
on that one.
It goes down. We want to eat less refined grains. Typical Western diet is about 150 grams, and the optimized diet sits at about 50 grams. Red meat, typical Western diet, 100 grams. I actually would have thought it to be a little bit higher in the Western diet.
Yeah, especially
but the recommendation for the optimized diet is 0 grams.
Of red meat?
Of red meat, yes. Just because of the levels of fats and the other unhealthiness that might be in a lot of our red meat. And we'll talk here in a moment about the kind of the middle of the road option that they take with what they call the feasibility approach, which is a probably more realistic approach for most of us.
Yeah, I would think that red meat would actually be a pretty good thing to add to our diet, with it being a good source of like creatine, B12, and a good source of fat.
And
but
saturated fats.
Yeah,
saturated fats are not good fats, and definitely. If we look at eating a high diet of red meat, it's going to give us, and we're going to talk lifespans here shortly, that gives us kind of the current lifespan, if you're on a typical Western diet. But if you cut that red meat to 0, it's going to have a significant effect on your life expectancy. Processed meat, 50 grams is the typical Western diet. Again, cutting that down to 0 in the optimized diet. White meat, so your chicken, typical Western diet, 75 grams, optimized diet, 50 grams.
Huh.
Sugar sweetened beverages. Get this, typical Western diet, 500 grams of sugary beverages. What do you think we have it at for the optimized diet?
0.
0, yes. Cut that sugar out. There's plenty of alternatives, and we can, talk some of the different alternatives that are out there as well. Added plant oils, typical Western diet, 25 grams. Optimized diet, it still remains at 25 grams, but I think, and I haven't dived into every corner of this article, but I would suspect that we want to shift this plant sources from more vegetable oils to more of your avocado and your olive oils and maybe coconut oils, the healthier fats as opposed to the unhealthier plant oils. But so what do you think? How would your diet stand up to the optimized diet? I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Well, honestly, I guess I would be taking in a lot more red meat than even a lot more white meat than the recommended dose. I think as far as the sugary drinks go, I definitely every now and then indulge in a sugary beverage. Gatorades are kind of my Achilles heel. I love them.
Is that because you're doing a lot of aerobic exercise? And
no, I just like the no,
rehydrate?
absolutely not. I just like the taste of Gatorade. But yeah, I think this is kind of eye opening. This article. So obviously, the study that they're showing is the better choice is to add more whole grains to the diet, and a good source of energy is those complex carbohydrates. So from what I'm hearing, it appears to me that this study is we're taking in enough food, just not enough proper nutrition. Are we malnourished, essentially?
Well, I mean, I think malnourished is a bit of a relative term. I mean, when we talk nutrients, I mean, obviously with our macros, our protein, carbohydrates, and fats are considered nutrients. And if we're not getting enough of those, we can be malnourished. But judging by the dramatic increases in the levels of obesity at almost all age in our country, especially over the last couple of years, I would say we're definitely not malnourished from that standpoint. And if we're consuming food, we should be getting enough nutrients. And I don't think that malnutrition is a huge issue in the Western countries. But, you know, when we start getting down into some of the micronutrients, we're certainly probably beginning to see some levels of malnutrition. The more processed foods we're eating, we're seeing more of an approach toward malnutrition. But I think with the amount of calories that we're consuming, that's not as much the issue as the effects that the added body weight, the chemicals that might be in the food, the other even natural substances that might be in food that can increase risks of heart disease and things like that are the factors that are contributing to what one would argue is probably an increase, or rather a decrease in life expectancy. Because if we can eat an optimized diet and add years to our lives, then are we actually adding to our life expectancy, or are we taking away from life expectancy by eating the typical Western diet? I would argue that we're probably taking away from our life expectancy by eating the way that we typically eat. And so, you know, it's really not dramatic changes. And, you know, when you go down through that list, the types of foods that one would be asking people to eat are not the expensive foods. You know, you're looking at legumes. You make a pot of lentil soup. It is one of the cheapest meals you can make, and it's going to be one of the most satisfying and filling meals that you can eat. You know, I keep talking about having John McGuire back on here to talk about my eating habits when I lived in New York with him, and I had like minimal food budget. That was one of the big things. I used to make big pots of lentil soup at the beginning of a week, and I'd eat on that all week. And my body fat was the lowest. I was probably some of the healthiest I've been in my life. And it's cheap. I mean, you buy that stuff in bulk. Go to Costco, buy a 50-pound bag of legumes, and you're good to go. So it's not expensive food. It takes a little bit more time and effort. It takes a little bit more creativity. I must say I do make a pretty good legume soup, whether it's pea soup or lentil soup. Can we count my chili as a legume? I'm mixing the chili. I try and cut down actually the red meat and the chili. I try and use ground turkey, use a little bit less meat in it, but it's got a good mix of everything. But when we look at this, it's in the book, in the article, it's table 1, but they look at life expectancy, male versus female at different ages. So they go in 20-year cohorts, looking at changes in the United States, China, and Europe. So it is a global study, and they're looking at the gains in life expectancy as we change from a typical Western diet to that feasibility approach, which is kind of the middle of the road approach, and then the optimized. And it's obvious that the older you get, the less you can really add to your life expectancy. But one fascinating takeaway that I found from this is that when you get into your 80s and you change your diet, you can still add some years to your life. And that's pretty impressive, that you can make changes at any point in your life. It's not going to be as dramatic as if you're, a young college student and you start looking at, gee, I've been eating pizza all through college and fast food. I got to eat differently, and changing that, the effect that you can have at that point on your life expectancy. But, as a whole, we see that, females have a longer life expectancy than males. I guess we drive them to an early grave, but, across the globe, women always tend to live longer than men. But typical life expectancy, pick an age. Give me an age here.
Let's go 33. 33.
I told you it's broken up in cohorts of 20, so we got to go 20 or 40 here.
Let's go 40.
Okay, so for a 40-year-old, the life expectancy for a male in the United States would be to live an additional 39.4 years. For a female, 43.3 years. So you're looking at living to be about 79, almost 80 years of age would be the life expectancy for the typical American on a typical diet. When we look at that same age group moving to the feasibility approach, again, the middle of a road approach, the life expectancy for males in their 20s actually gains approximately about 4.8 years, so almost 5 years, by shifting to that more feasibility diet. If we shift to an optimized diet, that same 40-year-old is going to have an additional gain of 11.7 years. So, as you're approaching your 40s, think about that you can actually live an additional almost 12 years by cutting that red meat, cutting those sugary drinks. And we'll talk here in a moment about how that breaks down, which of those nutrients is going to have the greater effect. So you can kind of, from this study, actually even pick and choose what are the things that I want to adjust in my diet that is going to have some impact. What's going to have the most impact? And, it's those baby steps. If we go and, we can't change everything. I don't think anybody is going to just wake up today and change their diet entirely, but they can change one thing in their diet and then work toward changing another thing in their diet. And over the course of a couple of years, or hopefully in a shorter span of time, actually be able to make some dramatic changes that are going to have a very powerful effect on their life. So let's see, what else with the 40-year-olds? So for a female, the change in the diet actually gains a little bit less. But again, they have a higher life expectancy, and perhaps, women that are on a typical American diet really probably aren't on as bad of a typical American diet as males. That may be kind of the case there. As we go into the optimized diet, like I said, it's about 11.7 year gain for the males. and about a 10-year gain for females. So we're looking at really 10 to 12 years if you're in your 40s. If you change your diet to fit this feasibility or optimized diet, you can add another 10 years to your life expectancy. When you get into your 80s, that change can be as much as 2 years, pretty much 2 years on the feasibility diet, 3.4 years for both males and females on the optimized diet, which may not seem like a lot, but again, that's going to be an average. And the other things that you're doing, if you're including exercise and stress management and relaxation techniques, getting enough sleep, getting more physical activity, you're probably even building on that life expectancy even further. But simply just changing the diet can have a decent effect. And I have to say, if I could live 3 extra years, that's better than not, right?
I would say it's, with my personal experience working with inside of an assisted living, I noticed that the individuals that had more energy throughout the day, they wanted to keep living, they wanted to keep going. But the individuals that were like, oh my gosh, it's my birthday, why am I still here? And they're just in so much pain and agony. I'm wondering if with this study, if it shows not just life expectancy, but like life longevity, like people's energy levels are being increased, people's moods are being increased, their cognitive ability is like, because if you're adding more years to your life, which is kind of our main goal, right? We want to age well. If you're adding more years to your life, are you adding more years and kind of being, are you adding more years and enjoying every moment of it is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, I think that's a whole nother set of studies really to look at quality of life that comes with. But, if you are making changes in your diet, you're shifting from a typical Western diet to this optimized diet or even the feasibility approach, that in itself has got to be adding some level of improved quality to life, because people that are making those decisions are likely to be making other decisions that are contributing to better quality of life. So most people that are miserable are not going to care about changing from the American diet. And I would argue that many of those people are miserable is because they're on the Western diet, and probably on the worst extremes of the Western diet.
Do you think it could also add a higher life expectancy? Because there are other studies that are out there as well that when you are taking in the optimal amount of nutrition for whatever your diet is, there's been certain cases out there where individuals, they stop taking their medicine that they're prescribed. Do you think that could go hand in hand with this?
Are you saying they stop taking it because they don't need it? Or they
yeah,
stop
so for example, if they have a well-balanced diet, but let's say they're diabetic, they no longer need to take their insulin shots because they've properly balanced out their blood sugar levels. Or say they were on high blood pressure medicine, and they just really did a whole lifestyle change, changed out their diet altogether, really started watching what they were eating, what they were taking in, what they were using as a fuel source, and eventually they get off of their blood pressure medicine.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's going to have a positive effect on their life expectancy if they're making the changes that are going to cause them to change their physiology, to improve their physiology so that they're less sensitive to insulin, or more sensitive to insulin. So, they are moving away from being diabetic. They're getting off hypertensive medication. They're able to move more and increase their level of physical activity, get out in the environment more. The biopsychosocial changes that are going to occur from that are going to be compounding, so that it's going to add to the overall quality of life, which is also going to add to the quantity of life as well. I think quantity and quality often really go hand in hand when we're talking about not often, they definitely go hand in hand when we're talking about making positive lifestyle changes. We can increase life expectancy, and we have in this country, by improved medications. But is that really improving the quality of life when you have a table of 20 different pills you have to take every morning just to stay alive? That's not really living.
Right.
So this is really improving the life expectancy and the quality of expectancy.
And it seems so simple. It's like, okay, I want to have a good quality of life. I want to live a little bit longer. I want to experience things. It's so simple. I just need to change out my diet. But living in America, you know, you just you hear a lot of excuses. One of them, I'm really glad you talked on the fees and affordability thing. A lot of the excuses that are out there is individuals say, well, it's so expensive to eat healthy, right? It's so expensive to do that. And the second thing is, I just don't have enough time in the day to go home and cook a meal. And you can eliminate that excuse alone just by meal prepping for the week, just like you said, every Sunday. And then for me, this is just a little trick that I use to kind of eat healthier or save money. I don't go inside the center aisles in a grocery store. I stick right on the outside. So I hit up the veggies and the meats and just kind of stick around the outside for my nutrition. But is that, I guess I just don't see it as an excuse of, oh man, eating is so expensive. It really doesn't have to be.
No, it's not. And a lot of it is, it's buying the processed food that we think is actually cheaper.
Right.
And because it is possibly cheaper, but it's also causing us to consume more of it, which we are over consuming, then that contributes to not only our gain in weight, but the fact that we're going to eat more. And so, we spend more money on that. We also tend to waste a lot of food that we buy.
That's true.
Which I think, is probably one of the reasons why when people say that eating fresh fruits and vegetables is so expensive, if they really evaluate, they're probably throwing away a lot of those fruits and vegetables because they're not actually eating them. They might buy them and put them on the counter and have an apple or something on occasion, but then they sit and they sit and they sit and they begin to rot. So sometimes it's, maybe it's the choices you're making, and it doesn't have to be the most expensive fruits or vegetables, and it doesn't have to be organic. I mean, again, if it's a budgetary issue, the difference between any health benefits you're going to get from going organic and even all natural, from the standpoint of, fresh fruits that, are whole and on the shelf versus canned or frozen. I mean, frozen fruits and vegetables, they're probably much tastier than the stuff that's on the shelf, because the stuff that's on the shelf has been sitting in boxes for forever. You buy an apple now, when's harvest season? We're in the Northwest. We're going to get probably the freshest apples. But when was the last time an apple was harvested in Oregon or Washington? It was probably September, October, and here we are in February. So that fruit is not super, super fresh. But fruits that are frozen, I love frozen blueberries. Get those year round. They're frozen immediately, so they're maintaining their nutrients, and they're not losing it as they're sitting on the shelf. It's not expensive. There's not waste. You pick the things that fit within your budget. When I was, the diet that I had in New York, I basically lived on carrots, because carrots are a relatively inexpensive but extremely nutrient-dense vegetable, and they keep fairly well in the refrigerator. I lived on a lot of steel-cut oats, because I could buy those in bulk and cook those up, and they were very filling, very good whole grain. Like I said, did do a lot of stuff with beans. I didn't eat nuts. Nuts probably can be a little bit expensive, but again, you go to Costco or a place where you can buy them the cheapest and in bulk, they're generally going to keep fairly well. Didn't eat as much red meat just simply because I couldn't afford it. So I probably ate more chicken, and I ate a fair amount of like canned tuna, which I know there's pros and cons to eating a lot of tuna, but it was relatively cheap and very good source of protein, and it was going to keep. And so I ate that. Ate a lot of eggs, which I guess according to this study I should not have. Need to cut that back a little bit, but if you look at this is what table it figures. It's figure 3 in the article. They have a comparison of the optimal versus the feasible diet. And the reason they don't have the typical Western diet on here because there's no changes from that, right? As you age, your life expectancy isn't improving at all. But from the optimal diet, what's going to have the biggest impact is legumes. And that, approaches about, 2.5 times increase in your life expectancy. Versus in the feasible diet, when you kind of go part way in doing that, the legumes, it looks like is somewhere between about 1 and 1.2 percent increase in life expectancy. So going down the list, the first thing, if you want to make the most impactful change, switch to eating some legumes. Include that in your diet, even if it's a couple meals a week. Having a side of lentils or side of any kind of bean, it's going to have a positive impact toward your life expectancy. Second is whole grains. We could easily shift from some of the more refined grains that we eat, which are going to decrease your life expectancy, to more whole grains. And by whole grains too, I would suspect you want to limit the whole grains that are refined into breads. Even though it's whole wheat bread or it's whole grain bread or whole grain cereal, it's still refined to a certain extent. And so by whole grains, I would say that's, good whole grain rice, whole grain oats, things like that, barleys and different grains like that, again, you can buy those in bulk relatively cheap, cook them up in bulk, and eat them throughout the week. That diet in New York, I used to cook up a big, huge pot of rice at the beginning of the week. And I bought, we had a co-op at the church I was attending, and we'd get all kind of good, healthy foods from it. And I would get, I think it was like a 25 or 50 pound bag of short grain, whole grain rice. I believe it was even organic, and it got really dirt cheap. And I would just cook up a big pot of that beginning of the week, and I'd partition it. I'd put it into pretty large Tupperware containers, and that I would take that, a couple hard-boiled eggs, and a load of carrots to my work, and that would be lunch. And I was eating really healthy. Red meat is kind of fourth on the list across the board, and I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the colors. But, red meat, processed meat, and sugar-sweetened cereals or sugar-sweetened beverages are all kind of in that same range of middle-of-the-road kind of effects. So small changes in that. You don't have to completely give up red meat. You don't have to completely give up processed meat, although I would say get rid of that as quick as possible.
Carcinogens.
Sugar-sweetened beverages, those are not hard to give up. And when you really start adding up the calories, you have one pop or soda, whichever you prefer to call it. I'm a pop person.
I'm a soda guy.
But, Oregon is divided when it comes to pop versus soda. But I grew up in Pittsburgh. It is pop. My wife grew up on Long Island. It's soda. So we really messed the kids up. But, one 20 ounce bottle of soda is like 160 calories. And you think about it, if you're drinking one of those a day, and if you can give that up, even give up a couple of them a week, over the course of a year, how many pounds are you shedding off of your body just by making that one change? And, if you have to drink pop or soda,
Seltzer.
Seltzer's nasty.
No, I've actually gotten used to them, and it gives me that fizziness. I had a soda the other day, and man, it was just filled with sugar. It was so sweet. It hurt my ribs. I was like, oh, I can't believe people drink that. I can't believe I used to drink this. Yeah.
Well, and once you get off it, your body can't handle it as well, and it's going to reject it like it's a toxin. Anybody who listens to the 2-hour podcast with Alex Whitaker that I recorded this past weekend at West Coast Strength, one of the gentlemen in the audience commented that he had a night or two before and Alex has got him completely off of sugar, and so he had a slice of, I think it was banana cream pie, and he said it was awesome. It tasted so good. But the next morning, he was sick as a dog. He felt like he had a hangover. I mean, he was so sick from just that sugar. And that, when you have that kind of response to food, what you were giving up. It was good that you gave it up, because what is it doing to your body that your body is going to be so quick to reject it? I don't eat pork anymore. I gave it up many, 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 many years ago. And I can tell, my body knows when it gets pork. If I eat like Chinese food, I know I'm going to need to get to a restroom within 20 or 30 minutes of that meal, because it very often gets mixed in with the food. And it's only like a trace amount, but it's that pork fat that just my system's like, oh no, we're not keeping this in here. And I know it sounds a little disgusting, but that's how if our body has that kind of response, it's telling us that what you were eating before was not good for you. Don't put it back in me. It's like, I'm rejecting this.
Well, I do think it's really interesting that this particular study, they want to have an increase in essentially the complex carbs on that, which is really interesting, because a lot of the big diets that are out there, the keto, the carnivore, the more high protein, higher fat, lower carbs, it kind of goes off. It kind of goes against this big longevity of it, of adding more life expectancy to your well-being, essentially.
Well, it depends how you're approaching the ketogenic diet, for one thing. I would argue that most people that claim to be on a ketogenic diet are not on a ketogenic diet. It is a diet that is very, very, very difficult to maintain properly, because if you want to be on a ketogenic diet, you're roughly looking at about 25 grams of carbs per day. So it's a very low amount of carbs, and it generally needs to be spread out throughout the day. So you might be looking at about like 5 grams of carbs per meal. And you can do that. I mean, if you eat one apple, that one apple has all those carbs. You're done for the day. You can't have anything else. But other choices like broccoli, I mean, the particular diet that the diet app that my wife and I use, when I've been in cutting phases, there's been periods where I'm down pretty low carbs, and in a meal I can only have like 5 grams of carbs. But I do that with broccoli, and it's like, you can have this amount of broccoli, load it on more. You start piling it up on your plate. You'd be surprised really how much of good whole grains and fresh fruits and vegetables that you can actually eat and still be in kind of that low carbohydrate diet. It's really the choices that you're making. And, if you're avoiding pastas, breads, and refined stuff, then yeah, it's a lot easier, to be on a ketogenic diet, just cutting all those out completely. But, legumes are a good source of protein. If you're a vegetarian, you better be eating legumes, because that's going to be your only real source of protein. It's very high in fiber. All of that absorbs more slowly into your system, so it digests slowly, absorbs slowly because of the high fiber. it's released out into your system in a much slower rate. So the glycemic index on these foods that are on the optimal diet is, much healthier than the typical American diet. So you don't have those spikes in insulin that would drive you or cause you to eat more. And so, I argue that, this does the ketogenic diet and some of these other popular fad diets for fast cutting of body fat are not optimal. But they're also not optimal when it comes to performance. If you're an athlete, you're not going to do as well on a ketogenic diet. I don't care what people say. And there are a few studies out there that try and purport that, you can perform more on a ketogenic diet. But there's always flaws in those studies. And our bodies are designed to operate off of carbohydrates as a preferred source of fuel. And so we need carbohydrates, but we don't need them in a tremendous rush of carbohydrates like we typically get from the traditional Western diet or typical Western diet. And so shifting to a diet like this, we may still maintain a little bit higher carbohydrate intake, but those carbs are being released much more slowly into the system and able to be utilized by the muscle as the muscle needs fuel rather than, getting this spike after we eat the meal. Carbohydrates are like, where are we going to go? The muscle's not active, so we don't need to go into the muscle. Well, we'll just store it up in fat. And so we store it in fat, and then you got to kind of release it from the fat. So I think it probably went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think that you have to kind of look into the studies and say, well, what studies are out there relative to the ketogenic diet and what effect diets like that have on longevity. And, they're going to have a positive effect on longevity from the standpoint of they're shifting away from the typical American diet and you're losing body fat. And with that loss in body fat, there are a certain number of healthy changes that occur within the body that are going to help you to live longer. If you can avoid diabetes and hypertension, heart disease, which most people, the way they eat the ketogenic diet, they're not avoiding heart disease. They're just, they're going to be a little bit skinnier when they put the paddles on their chest to restart their heart. Because they assume that they can have high fat and high red meat content and it's all bacon and beef and high fatty foods, not considering the quality of the foods that they're eating and also the quantity of the foods they're eating.
It seems like paleo would be probably a more balanced diet.
Can I ask what the F is paleo?
Paleo. Yeah. So paleo is leaner sources of protein, right? So it's going to be your chickens, your fish. You take in a lot more green meat, but
green meat.
I'm sorry, green. Take more greens, and you're still cutting back on the carbohydrates, though. And if you were to take a carbohydrate, it would be. I didn't know
that paleo necessarily cut back on carbohydrates. It cuts back on refined carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. Paleo is the whole notion that, first of all, we know what the Paleolithic man was eating, and that Paleolithic man had access to avocados, which is highly unlikely. The paleo, on the surface, the basics of paleo is really what we're presenting, or this article is presenting in terms of that more optimal diet. But somebody just thought it would be unique and marketable to tack on paleo because, obviously the Paleolithic man lived longer than we do now. And I think anthropologists have actually refuted that notion that the true Paleolithic diet would have been healthier for man than the diet we eat now.
But they were also a lot more active.
How do you know that? Were you there?
I don't have to be there. I'm pretty sure the cavemen were not sitting at a desk all day long for their job. They were probably out hunting and gathering and building civilizations. I'm pretty sure they were a lot more active than we were.
I'm not sure the Paleolithic man actually built civilizations. That came a little bit later. But
they were
point
dreamers.
Is we don't know, and as well the types of foods that were available to Paleolithic man are far different than what they promote in the paleo diet.
Of course, because we genetically modified most of our food.
No, it has not. Oh, don't come on genetically modified, because that's a whole other topic. And when you consider that somebody like a Paleolithic man, a more ancient species of man, was much more of a hunter-gatherer, depending on kind of where they are in history and everything else. And if they're a hunter, they basically relied on meat and any kind of fruits and berries that they could pick along the way. They weren't cultivating food, so they didn't have access to tremendous abundances of food like we have now. They don't have exotic foods that we have now. We get food from all over the globe. If you really want to eat like a Paleolithic man, then you can only eat the foods that you can get within walking distance of where you are in your life. So go into the grocery store and go down that aisle that has, avocados from Mexico and, nuts from Brazil or, whatever. Oregon grown, buy local only, and buy it in season.
That's right. And well, that's another thing. I think if someone is going to say, I want to do something as paleo, how my ancestors ate, then I think people should eat seasonally, right?
Okay, and if you want to eat like your ancestors, then, okay, what is your ancestry? My ancestry is Scottish, Irish, Welsh. I guarantee they didn't eat all that well.
No.
And that's more likely to have a much higher meat diet, probably some grains, but probably, much more limited in terms of the types of grains that they were eating. If you want to eat like your ancestors, then you should choose your parents wisely and have picked the Mediterranean ethnicity, because the Mediterranean diet is probably hands down the probably healthiest of all diets. If you're going to put a label on a diet and tie it to your ancestry and market it as such, then I'd say the Mediterranean approach would be much closer, more like this feasible diet, maybe not quite to the optimal diet, but a little bit better. But I think, when you start talking paleo diet, you're really you're talking marketing there.
Yeah, I agree.
You don't agree.
No, I do. I actually, I do agree. So in the study, did it talk about hormone levels at all, or increasing them, balancing them out?
Again, this was estimating the impact feature on life expectancy. So it didn't measure, it only really looked at life expectancy. But, it's not a huge leap to expect that eating the optimal diet is going to have a much better regulatory effect on hormonal levels in the body. Because we know the typical Western diet wreaks havoc on our hormones.
Absolutely.
And so, it's...
Well, I'm assuming since it kind of goes hand in hand with life expectancy, it brought up energy levels, right? If you're adding more years to your life, you obviously have the energy to do stuff, because what else adds more years to your life, which we've discussed, is exercising and having that balance of exercise, nutrition, being physically active. I'm assuming.
You're assuming that's what talked about in the study?
I'm assuming it at least.
It's not in the study, because again, that's not the intent of the study, and this is why I I generally never take a single study as the answer to everything. This one's a very good study in that it is looking at a measurable factor of the diet. It's not looking at every nuanced impact that we can have on our life expectancy, but just simply that if we look at changing our diet approach, we are going to have a significant impact on improving our life expectancy. And they do, when they're looking at the data, it says most of the background data are adjusted for factors such as smoking, exercise, age, and sex. And we've been talking in terms of the age distributions and the gender differences. The groups are probably relatively balanced across exercise. As you learn, you probably learned it from me. You didn't have pathophysiology and exercise with me, but one of my big drive home messages in that class is if you want to live a longer, healthier life, stop smoking, improve your diet, and exercise. You do those three things, you're going to add quality and quantity to your life. You're dramatically limiting the risk of disease that is going to cause your life to end early. Now, obviously, you can argue that if you are exercising intensely or you are, extremely physically active to where you're climbing Mount Everest and things like that, you may be putting yourself in a situation to have a shorter lifespan because of accidental death. But, some would probably argue that is not decreasing their life because they're able to live a more fulfilling life by taking risk and doing adventurous kind of things. We can have some impact on reducing our risk of early death by just simply wrapping ourselves in bubble wrap and staying at home.
But that's not living.
That's not living, right. And so, this again is one study, but when we look at including it with other healthy choices, which the people who are going to make the choice to eat the optimal diet or even the feasible diet, they're more likely to be making other choices as well, where they're going to start exercising more, become more physically active. These are not going to be people who are smoking cigarettes. These are not people who are going to take unnecessary risks, speeding down the highway without a seatbelt on or driving drunk or those kind of things, or consuming, this doesn't talk at all about the effects that alcohol can have on life expectancy. So there are a lot of things that can contribute, but just these major changes, just having one fistful of nuts a day is almost, for that 20 to 30-year-old, it's having about a 1.5 to 1.75 increase in life expectancy. Now it drops off dramatically, as we age. The plots here, when you hit about 65, are dropping pretty significantly so that, there's less of an increase, but you're still seeing a significant increase. I mean, for an 80-year-old who just starts having a handful of cashew nuts or something a day is going to have a 0.5 increase in life expectancy. So it's contributing. Each thing contributes a small amount. Now, if we're talking in terms of the individuals at varying ages, if we're looking at, being 60 and going on a feasibility diet as a male, you're going to increase your life expectancy. You gain about 4.8 years in life expectancy just from changing your diet. Now, add exercise into that and lose 20 pounds. I don't have the data in front of me to quantify that, but I would suspect that you're still talking, a year, 2, 3, maybe 6 years that you're adding to your life by making those changes. And so all those changes start to add up. You want to be an octogenarian. You ain't going to do it by eating a typical Western diet, sitting on your butt, drinking beer, and watching television all the time. You got to be active. You got to be, doing other things that are going to make healthier lifestyle choices.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it right on the head, right? In order to add extra things in order to add extra years to your life, it's not just eating well. It is exercise, like we've talked about. It goes hand in glove. They go together. If you want to add life, and yes, there are going to be people that argue, right? There's always those strange anomalies, like the original actor that played in Spartacus in the
Kirk Douglas?
No, not that one. No, the one from the 2000s, Andy.
That's not the original Spartacus.
Not the one from the 60s. Yeah, no.
There is only one Spartacus, and that's Kirk Douglas.
Well, anyways, this actor, Andy, he was religiously working out, really good, strict diet, and he ended up getting cancer, right? There are those anomalies that we can't prevent, and we can't really.
Well, there are numerous things that cause cancer that are unrelated to physical activity and to diet. There
Correct.
are so many other environmental factors. There's genetic factors. I'm not sure who this guy is, let alone what kind of cancer he had, but it could be he was getting too much sun and had melanoma that metastasized and caused cancer. I mean, there's plenty of things, but we do know too that diet, exercise, and regular physical activity and healthy living is going to still reduce the risk of those cancers. And so, sometimes you got to ask, if somebody gets cancer, how much did living my life the way I did give me added years that I might not have had I not lived my life this way?
Right.
So
and that's kind
it's
of
always
the point.
sad when somebody loses their life to cancer, but just because somebody has cancer does not mean that they weren't living a healthy lifestyle. It's just, they got, they drew the short straw when it came to something messing up their DNA that became a, metastasizing neoplasm in their body that caused them to, to lose function and ultimately die. So I think it's a wrong thing for people to kind of make those comparisons, say, well, yeah, but so-and-so did all this stuff right, and look, they still died. Well, everybody's going to die. I mean, Jack LaLanne is probably one of the, most fit people ever, and he lived, I think, well in his late 80s, might have been early 90s.
Yeah.
Somebody could say, well, he died. Well, yeah, because he was old.
He did, but he was also so physically active, even up into his 90s.
Yeah.
I think even in his 80s, he did an exercise challenge on, I don't remember what birthday it was, but it was in his 80s, and he swam from one island all the way into like the main shoreland with, I think he had a little rowboat attached to his waist, and his wife was sitting in there. I'm pretty sure that's
he's done more than just that. He did a different feat, I think, every birthday. I think
in his 80s though.
I think he even towed I want to say it was a cruise ship or something like that, like pulling it and a rope in his teeth. But yeah, I mean, the guy was. I mean, some of that's a little bit trickery, but because you can get the boat moving a little bit. Once it's moving, it's moving. But he kind of played into physics a bit and everything else. But I mean, yeah, he was an extremely fit individual well until his last few days. So, you never know what's going to ultimately take your life. But, if we're talking about, aging well, then you got to talk about the things that are going to make it the best quality while you are living and trying to make those years go as long as possible. And as we've talked about with healthcare and things like that, I think much of our healthcare today is really just sick care. And we're keeping people alive through medications that are at the same time killing people and not really focusing in on changing the quality of life in a way that's going to add quantity to life, which in turn adds quality to the life or quantity to the life. And so, we got to be looking at universal health as opposed to just universal health care. We have to look at what are the changes that we can make. And I think one of the most dramatic things that we can do And from this study, I'd say globally, when you're including the United States, China, and Europe, it doesn't include Africa and South America, but I would suspect that you would see the same kind of patterns as many of those countries globally are adopting the American diet and getting sick for the worst of it. And so, if we can find ways society-wise to change the diets, get rid of fast food, get rid of the processing, try and, change the logistics for how food is moved about and get people access to good, healthy food and get good, healthy food to the poorest of and most sick of Americans, you're going to see dramatic changes in the cost of healthcare as well as the life expectancy of people in the United States as well as abroad.
So this study reflected that we would be able to add how many more years to our life potentially? You're
looking at anywhere from probably the oldest population of males going on that feasibility diet, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 2 to 3 years of increased life expectancy, to being in the optimal diet in your 20s and increasing your life expectancy by what's approaching probably 20 years, or actually more than 20 years. So I think that's pretty substantial, and I think there's no better time to make the change than today. And it doesn't have to be the dramatic change, go whole hog into, no pun intended there, don't go whole hog. You want to avoid the hog. But, go all in trying to consume the optimized diet. Make small steps, go to baby steps, pick what you can change nearly immediately that will have some effect. If you can just eliminate sugar-sweetened beverages, that's the only thing you change, you're going to add to your life expectancy. So you do that, you get that out of your system, and getting rid of just sugary foods in general. In the meantime, you're likely to be replacing that with some other choices. Maybe you're having more fresh fruit. That's going to contribute. You add some more vegetables to your diet, just good fresh vegetables. That's going to help. Shifting to whole grains instead of refined grains, that's going to help. Cutting down just 1, 2, 3 days of red meat a week is going to have an impact. And, just wean yourself off of that. If you're consuming dairy, wean yourself off of dairy and make healthier choices. Instead of whole milk, you start shifting to 2% to skim milk. So you shift over, you're having some yogurt instead of, cheeses. That's going to be a better, healthier choice. And so just making small, healthy choices are going to begin to add up very quickly over time.
And it doesn't have to be expensive either. We talked about a few pro tips on ways that it can be cheaper and you can still have a healthy, balanced diet. And even if you are going to splurge a little bit, that's okay, because the money that you are putting in for a little bit more healthier option that is ever so slightly more expensive than the cheaper route, well, look at it as a way that you're investing into your future self and an investment to add those years to your life. It really doesn't have to be that time consuming. I know that we live in a super, super busy schedule, but get in the habit of meal prepping. I personally like to do every single Sunday. I either meal prep all my meals, good to go for the full week. I either put them in the freezer or the fridge, or if I'm super, super busy, I throw everything in the crock pot and then go that route. Anything else that we... No? All right. Yeah. Well, I think that's going to conclude today's episode. And always remember, keep aging well.
Keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.